Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. Our guest is Graham Allison, who is the director of the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard University. He's also a former Assistant Secretary of Defense under Bill Clinton, and he is the author of an inside account of how Barack Obama took the decision to send U.S. Special Forces inside Pakistan to kill Osama bin Laden exactly 1 year ago. The piece was published in Time magazine and it's drawn from over 100 hours of interviews with top officials. It's a fascinating read, eerily reminiscent of the one Graham Allison penned 4 decades ago to describe how John Kennedy dealt with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Graham Allison joins us via satellite from Washington, D.C. Welcome to the France 24 interview.
Thank you very much for having me.
So when Barack Obama is elected and takes a seat in the White House in early 2009, he tells the CIA Director Leon Panetta that killing or capturing Osama bin Laden is the top priority. However, the trail had gone cold since late 2001 in the mountains of Afghanistan, but then suddenly things changed in August of 2010.
Well, it's a fascinating story with many twists and turns, and around almost every corner is another surprise. But when Obama became president here January of 2009 and got a report that the trail was essentially cold, as the director of CIA for President Bush, Mike Hayden, has said it was stone cold, he was surprised. And one of his first, indeed his first order to his new director of CIA was, let's find bin Laden. So over the next 15 months, a more intensified effort went on across the whole U.S. intelligence community and with other intelligence communities with whom the U.S. cooperates, including the French intelligence community, to search every clue and to then re-examine the pieces of evidence that had been assembled previously. So by August of 2010, so this is now a year and a half into President Obama's term, Panetta went back to the White House to say, we found this compound in Abbottabad, about 35 miles from Islamabad, where as I said, it smacks of a Al-Qaeda place, and we think Osama bin Laden may be there.
And what happens then? Obviously, Obama gets this information, and there are many surveillance methods that are put into place. You describe some of them, for example, using mini drones that look like a bird, or trying to analyze the sewage near the compound. And we even had information that a doctor tried to get DNA samples from the bin Laden family by going through a vaccination campaign. So all U.S. efforts were put on the line there.
Yes, I think Obama said to Panetta, do everything possible to clarify the situation, but make sure you don't trip the wire that leads bin Laden to discover that you've found his hideout and that he, escapes. By December, so this is now, 5 months later, Panetta is able to go back in December of 2010 and say to Obama, we think that there's a reasonable prospect, a strong evidence for thinking that the man in this compound, who's certainly tall and who walks around the courtyard, so the CIA called him the Pacer, whom they had been watching in various methods, we think that this may be our man.
What instruments did they use that you can speak of to seemingly identify him at this time? I mean, what was the difference?
Well, their best clue came from the fact that Osama bin Laden was known to have one favorite courier. Indeed, that ultimately he had gotten down to using only one courier. And this courier was living in this house with his family. And there was a second family in this house. And then there was a third mysterious family, but the mysterious family that lived on the top floor had the appropriate number of wives and the appropriate number of children to be Osama bin Laden. So there was a clue. Then obviously they listened to everything they could listen to, and then they observed everything they could observe. So you mentioned the method that was revealed after when the Pakistanis caught this doctor. The doctor was giving vaccinations in the community, and they hoped that if a vaccination was taken in that household of one of Osama bin Laden's children, you could extract from that DNA, which would then give you a clue to the fact that the father was in the house. But even up to the moment in which they made this final decision, the advisors that President Obama was looking to ranged from people who thought, Panetta thought it was a 75 or 80% chance that this was bin Laden, to people like Leiter at 40%, and Gates was even below that. So Obama, I think, in the end thought it was about 50-50 that this was bin Laden. It could have been some other al-Qaeda, senior official, or it could have actually been a big drug dealer or something. So they didn't know for sure until they got their man who this was going to be.
In Washington, there's also one problem, is keeping things secret. And from what you're telling, they made it. They made it a secret for a very long time.
Now, I would say the biggest surprise in this story to me, as an analyst having studied many instances of national security decision-making, is that the sexiest story in town, the reporters never got to report until after the fact. Now, this was done by narrowing the circle of the people who were involved in the process to the smallest possible number, and also by extreme care at every point. But I would have been, if I had been, an advisor on the wall, I think I would have been terrified that this thing was going to leak, would pop up in a blog or in the news, in a news report, that al-Qaeda would be alerted and that the target would vanish. So this was the idea that from December until May 1st, when this was finally concluded, this president was that cool and determined to make sure that he clarified the target and to make sure who was in the crosshairs, and that there was time to aim before he fired, suggests that this is a pretty determined and controlled commander-in-chief.
I mean, one of the most fascinating aspects that you described, and probably because of the uncertainty about the identification of bin Laden, is the fact that Obama, just before, a couple of days before the operation, took a vote with his main advisors, and his vice president was against it, and his defense secretary, Robert Gates, as well as the top military in the room. So Obama was facing some disagreements within his own close circle of advisors.
Absolutely, and that helps us who are looking at it as students afterwards to notice that this was a tough decision. If the people in the room, if it was an easy decision, everybody would have agreed. So the fact that the most experienced member of the group in national security affairs, Bob Gates, who had been Secretary of Defense for President Bush as well as for President Obama, but who had actually been the junior intelligence officer in the back of the room, in the Situation Room, in 1980, when President Carter ordered helicopters to try to rescue the hostages in Iran, was nervous. He thought that the helicopter might crash. Actually, one did, that the folks might be captured. So he thought the risk was too great. And in the case of Biden, he thought they didn't have enough information yet.
Also, the choice of the sending forces. I mean, you could have bombed the place, was probably also the riskier one. I mean, maybe there are more rewards, but there were lots of risks involved.
Well, I mean, looking at the 4 or 5 options that were available, Obama ended up choosing the one that had highest reward, if it worked, but highest risk, given the risks of failure. So if the SEALs, 24 of them who went in, their helicopter had crashed, as I say, as one of the helicopters did. Fortunately, they had brought a backup helicopter, which they had not done in 1980. And if these SEALs had been captured, you could have had some hostages. If the compound had been surrounded. So you can go if, and if. So this included a lot of downside risk. On the upside, if the SEALs went in, they would be sure who it is that they captured or killed. So they took the body with them, and that was extracted from DNA, so there was no question this was Osama bin Laden. They also collected a treasure trove of material there at the site in the way of notebooks and hard drives and
I want to ask you about that very quickly because we have to conclude. One big question was whether the Pakistani top authorities knew bin Laden was there, and you asked the question, how come he had lived within Pakistan for 6 years with many wives, with many children, and seemingly had gone unnoticed? What's the answer? Did the Pakistanis know, and did they hide it from the U.S.?
Well, you put the question just right, and I would say on the basis of what I know today and what the intelligence community has learned from all this material they seized in the raid, there's no evidence, not a shred of evidence, that any of the leadership of the military or intelligence community in Pakistan knew about this, which is an almost inconceivable idea. So I would say if it is the case, I'm still not for certain, but if it is the case that Kayani and his associates did not know about it, that would leave me even more disturbed than if they had been complicit. Because these are the same people, this is the same hierarchy that we're counting on to know where their 100 nuclear weapons are.
Okay, Graham Allison, I have to stop you there. It's a fascinating story. You can read it in Time magazine. I want to thank you for being a host on the France 24 interview. Stay tuned here for more news.